Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is a really busy time of year to be here with us today. I'm also super excited to have this session as it's the first one since the release of the what will be the 2026 curriculum. And I know for us in French Immersion, that's always, it's a bit of a scary place, but I love that you're here because I think we can navigate this together. And of course, tech is always my friend. Nous allons commencer avec notre reconnaissance des terres. Nous reconnaissons que le travail d'ONlit se déroule sur des territoires autochtones traditionnels. Nous reconnaissons que 46 traités et autres accords couvrent le territoire qui s'appelle aujourd'hui l'Ontario. Nous sommes reconnaissants de pouvoir travailler sur ces terres et nous sommes reconnaissants envers les Premières Nations, aux Métis et aux Inuits pour les soins qu'ils apportent à ces terres, ainsi que les enseignements qu'ils en tirent. Cette reconnaissance nous rappelle nos responsabilités à l'égard de nos relations et des terres ancestrales sur lesquelles nous apprenons, travaillons et vivons. Et pour moi, I always think of how much of a privilege it is to be able to support French as an additional language when so many languages have been lost. And definitely think, especially as kindergarten educators, helping support those students to understand the value of learning multiple languages. So happy to be here today. And unfortunately, Jordan couldn't join us, but I'm grateful to be joined by MJ and Una from ONlit and grateful to them for their support. Just a note that Dyslexia Canada, or ONlit, is a collaboration between Dyslexia Canada and the International Dyslexia Association of Ontario. And funding is provided by the Ontario Ministry of Education, but note that the views expressed are the views of ONlit and do not necessarily reflect those of the Ministry of Education. That being said, I feel like today's session really does kind of combine those things that we know we need to do in the classroom every day and what is part of those Ministry of Education documents. So for today, we're going to go over the theme. We'll have some time for question and answer and talk a little bit about what's coming up with ONlit. So just wanted to kind of highlight, I know that some of you may know me from French, some of you may know me from other venues, but I do have a fair number of years in kindergarten. I taught kindergarten for 14 years, and I also have my kindergarten specialist and have worked within the Math Knowledge Network connected to mathematics. Was very fortunate to do a project with ACP connected to 4 to 6 year olds in immersion. So I was just telling Una this particular session, I think, is just my heart is definitely in it. And I think of all the valuable relationships and experiences I've had throughout my journey. And I can't express my gratitude to the ONlit team enough for just supporting collaboration and coherence across Ontario, particularly Lisanne, Nikki, and Jordan for their support with this session before in the planning of it. So as we move into le déroulement de la journée, we know that the flow of the day in kindergarten really has a strong impact on literacy learning throughout the day, and knowing that that schedule should be predictable yet flexible. So I know myself, it's like kind of reading the students and understanding what they need and when. So adapting to their learning needs, seasonal changes, which I know we've had a lot of experience with this last little bit, school routines, and of course, trying to minimize any transition. So intentionally embedding those key elements of learning across the day and following a children rather than the clock. That being said, I know sometimes there are parameters, there are clocks that we do need to follow. For example, home, like dismissal or like transition to home or transition to childcare. Often there is a clock that we need to follow. But thinking of those times, for example, where you could maybe extend something or you need to shorten something based on what you're noticing for the students. And knowing that those schedules are really designed to reflect and respond to the children it supports. So as we think of those instructional approaches for kindergarten that are in the 2026 kindergarten curriculum, we really know that we want to highlight those instructional approaches, and then instruction takes place both indoors and outdoors in those learning environments and supports all students with their knowledge, skills, and habits of mind just in order to achieve those not only the curriculum expectations, but enjoy learning and setting that foundation for learning for years to come. So knowing that those foundational knowledge and skills are taught through evidence-based, systematic, and explicit instruction, as well as student-centered play and inquiry-based learning. And I know myself, I was so excited to see that they have bridged that and that it's all in there and very evident to us as educators and helping us feel supported in the work that we do every day. So the kindergarten curriculum also emphasizes the importance of those responsive relationships. And it reminds me very much of the How Does Learning Happen document that's quite old, but it really reminds me of that. Just knowing that each student is unique and understanding their strengths, their learning needs, their interests, that they're important for building relationships, engagement, and promoting that asset-based approach. And when I think of the asset-based approach, I can't help but think of the Common European Framework of Reference, so the CEFR, which is really foundational to learning, teaching, and assessment in FSL. So to me, it's just a wonderful kind of commitment between those two things. So thinking about the way that we design the flow of the day in kindergarten can really have a huge impact on the literacy learning that occurs throughout the day and connects to all strands. And knowing that the four strands have been renamed, reordered, but Foundations of Language and Mathematics is, of course, the title of the new strand, or revised. I'm sorry, I know you're looking, but you know what I mean. Problem solving and innovating.
No apologies, please.
Problem solving and innovating, of course, has a couple of changes with the addition of coding, self-regulation and well-being, and belonging and contributing. And I think especially in French as an additional language environment, helping all students feel that sense of belonging. I even prefer that word over inclusion when it comes to that kindergarten piece. I like them both, but that notion of belonging and feeling like you can be somewhere and belong there. So the one thing that I think about is when we're creating an environment, thinking about like the time, the space, the materials, and that they reflect each student's learning needs. And I know it's a hard thing to plan for, but like asking yourself, why this learning for this learner at this time? So I know I've been in situations where educators have asked for support. And typically speaking, it's reflecting on that question that really helps them shift practice in order to be able to better support all learners in their classroom. And I am so grateful to Nikki for sharing this. And she had created it in English, and I'm like, but it works. And just emphasizing that there's not just one way to build a flow of the day. This is a sample, but thinking about what works for the students in the class. And that could even change from the beginning of year to November. And then again, looking at the weather, thinking about those transitions, knowing that sometimes those are really challenging. And I always found that in September, October. I always loved the middle of October because that's when those transitions, you really started to feel that. And taking time to build those routines, especially because you're speaking. I know in my case, it was 100% French. So I'm speaking a language and I'm really using my gestures and my facial expressions to help them understand what I'm meaning. But as they developed those routines, it really came into place. Also, the advantage of having a 2-year kindergarten program is that oftentimes some of the students in the class, being that they're in year 2, can help support that happening. So knowing that we can't eliminate any transitions, but we can definitely soften them. And thinking about that soft entrance, and I know for me, this really varied depending on the schedule of busing or where they dropped off, all of those types of things. But thinking about how that really gives us a chance to check in with the children, especially as they're either leaving their families or leaving the childcare that they've been at since 6:30 in the morning in some cases. So really thinking about how can we just provide that transitional time in the morning. I love this, that so the yellow indicates those transitions and trying to keep those to a minimum. Green indicates the indoor and outdoor play, and really looking at the various types of play in the kindergarten curriculum, which we'll have a chance to touch base about in a bit. And then red is that whole group instruction. So thinking about how that explicit instruction can really be used, and notice it's placed in amongst some long periods of learning so that really students will be able to focus in that whole group time. And purple is that small group targeted instruction, which we know is critical, especially for early literacy. Blue is community eating, which I love this. And I know that oftentimes there are constraints around when students have to eat. I know ourselves, we're on balanced day. And so we have to have conversations, and it varies even from school to school about, that optional nutrition time versus the time when that lunch aid is there and they have to be eating. There's certain things that we do have to work within and around. But just that notion of community eating is just such a great time for students to interact, build relationships, that's building that sense of well-being. I found, and I know I've had some conversations with colleagues about, you know, after the pandemic, for a long time, they were putting on the TV and they're shifting back because they realized how much was missing from having a screen on during that time. Just that oral interaction is so rich. And then, of course, knowing that the entry points and percentages of French instruction vary in French immersion. In some cases, it's like half a day with one language and half a day with the other. Thinking about how might you structure your flow of the day within your context. And knowing that literacy learning happens throughout the day, not just in one spot, especially in a French immersion setting, literacy is happening all the time. And then also just thinking about how that oral language, that really rich oral language, needs to also be happening in alignment with that really precise and that explicit instruction around the word recognition in order to get to that language comprehension. So I did want to I know this is from 2022, but it really is, I know where our journey started in 2019, but this was really sort of where it all started to really come together. So really looked at how can we support what is an equitable, inclusive, responsive, comprehensive literacy program in French immersion that's based on what we know, the research on reading that uses assessment and instruction to ensure every student has the right to read. So that was where this document came from. I'll admit it was from 2022. I've learned since then, but I do still find, we've learned since then, but I do still find the document helpful to support conversations around some of those approaches. And even in some cases, would this work? Does this work? What do we know differently now? And this was based on a project between us and ACP. So it was really a great, I feel like it was a great springboard into where we are now. So one of the pieces that I love about this is that this document that it's actually designed as a self-reflection tool for students to consider where am I in my understanding. So just using the little pictures. So if I've read a book to them, how do they feel they are? Or if they're needing to talk to someone and express their needs, are they able to do it? And I was thinking to myself about sometimes when I'm trying to model, particularly in connection to the comprehension, building vocabulary standard of the rope, if I'm needing to model interaction and I'm a solo classroom, because I know some of our kindergarten classrooms are down to or have 16 or less students, and so it's one adult in the room on their own. And I had this experience when I was in the classroom, but also during virtual learning where I was here and the students weren't able to have their cameras on because it was emergency. So I actually purchased a puppet so that I could interact or model what that interaction looks like. And the puppet only speaks French. So it's really, really is an opportunity to show what that interaction model, what interaction looks like. I know my superintendent is like, Angeline, you want a puppet? And I'm like, I do. I really want one. So thinking about the whole group instruction and really trying to think about what is the ideal time for your students. Many consider that early in the morning, not necessarily first thing, but once things have transitioned and you're ready, that's a great time for this. And thinking about it, the systematic piece, so carefully planned sequence for instruction, explicit, so it's clear, direct, and purposeful, teaching concepts, knowledge, skills, and strategies. We've been using Sonograph in our board. I don't think anybody's surprised at that. But that is what we use for this particular piece, including lots of modeling, highly interactive, and a perky pace. And I know it's hard because some people are like, I just want to add this in, or I just want to do this. But really, and I'm excited to see, I know the team's doing some research. I'm excited to see what comes out of that about implementing it with fidelity because of those opportunities to practice and those ability to provide that feedback and the interleaving. So that's something I know that we haven't really done a lot before that we're finding really helpful. And also, I really like the You Fly in Kindergarten doc created by Kate Wynn and the creators of You Fly just for some of those FAQs are really important. And I know like your decisions for you may be based on your program model. If you're 50-50, what does UFly look like? Or if you're using a different program, and what does Sonograph look like? Or if you're using a different program. But I know those are some of the conversations I get asked. And how might it differ for your students in JK or year one of kindergarten compared to year two of kindergarten? Are they all part of it? And then you build extensions into that small group. So I know that those are some of the conversations that are definitely happening. But just this component really connects to that curriculum strand A, Foundations for Language and Mathematics, looking at A2, Foundations for Reading and Writing and Applying Early Reading and Writing Skills. And those of you familiar with Scarborough Rope, it's really targeting that word recognition strand of the rope. Then when we also particularly I think in all languages, but in French immersion, the value of mentor texts and I think considering those from diverse backgrounds, striving for Canadian authors where possible. And I know that sometimes that's all the we want to make sure it's in French, diverse background, Canadian authors, but doing the best we can. And I know there's a lot of supports out there to look for these, but supporting skill development, intellectual growth, and bringing joy. Like I love a good read aloud. And I think also looking at the value of connecting, finding those connected videos in Idelo so that you can help show students hear someone else speaking the language. And they have some great short videos that are designed for younger learners in French as a second language programs. And really, I like the backwards design. So what is it I want my students to know and be able to do? So I'm going to use this mentor text and I'm going to read it repeatedly for a few reasons. And I'm going to connect to the curriculum, the CFR. I'm going to pull out some really rich, meaningful vocabulary that they're going to be able to use in an authentic way in everyday conversation. Looking at early morphology, I think it's really important. I know in Sonograph, one of the things that comes up is the I am. And so like explaining in a simple way how that works. Text features things like bold text and the screaming text on a page, and of course language structures. Having a strong model early on of what I know we all hear j'ai still. So if we can model for them what is it that they're supposed to say as frequently as possible, really, really in an authentic way, it gives us an opportunity to do that. And so this, of course, looking at that A3, understanding and responded to text strand of the curriculum, the A3, and that language comprehension strand of the rope. So thinking about, and again, I'm going to thank Nikki for just coming up with these, but I'm like, these all work and they're things that we're doing. So being intentional about those transition times. So there's those times sometimes I know, again, sometimes you're waiting for someone or you're needing to line up or go somewhere. So making use of those times and being really intentional. And I know we talk about that importance of the phonemic awareness is something that we've noticed through our data is definitely an area to support, whether it's first sound fluency, phoning, segmenting, blending. So I loved when Nikki showed us yesterday, like, qu'est-ce qu'il y a dans mon sac? Dans mon sac, il y a une banane. Quel est le premier son qu'on entend dans le mot banane? Oui. And again, sometimes you might need to model like very early in September what that looks like. And that's where I may, just at the start, till they get the hang of it, use my puppet to help with the right answer. I might. So thinking about the value of play and just how it supports the creation of learning environments that help all students make sense of the world around them and to feel comfortable in applying their own way of thinking and learning. And I think of the vision of the 2026 kindergarten curriculum for students to develop the foundational knowledge and skills needed to communicate effectively, solve problems, think critically, make informed decisions, and thrive in a global community. And I was like, that is like so similar to like the vision for our French as a second language programs and the framework goal of just really increasing student confidence, proficiency, and achievement in French. And so, and helping them be global citizens and the critical thinking. And knowing that play is really such a powerful context for language development through because of the repetition, the engagement, especially in our immersion programs, I think that just that those things support that language learning. I I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that those of you looking for further supports for grade ages 4 to 6 and seeing videos of classroom practice, there is the Zone Petite Enfance from ACP that actually has a structured literacy section, but also a play-based learning section. So if you are a member, I do encourage you to take a look. There are videos of in-class practice, and I find sometimes it's seeing what does this look like and sound like, and they're from across Canada. So that's also really, really neat just to get a different concept of what that looks like. And through that work, and actually, I was very fortunate through the Math Knowledge Network to meet Dr. Angela Pyle from OISE in the Play Learning Lab. And this, I mean, it's on their website also, and also through working with ACP, just looking at the various types, the continuum of play-based learning and what that looks like, but the value of each of those components. So student-directed play, where students are constructing their own play and learning, and educators are using pedagogical documentation to consider what are the implications of this for my instruction. And that really helps with that social emotional skills, the oral and nonverbal communication skills, and helps students apply, practice things that they've already learned. Knowing that as educators, we can really create learning environments using materials and space that respond to students' interests and extend their learning. Then guided play, and I know Dr. Angela Pyle would say that this is the magical space, but I really think they are all magical and seeing the value in all of them. But where you're collaboratively designing the learning with students and educators together, and where students can direct the play while educators intentionally integrate opportunities for students to apply and practice those skills and strategies that they've learned, but in a play context. So including reinforcing those explicitly taught skills through the play experience. So that's guided play. And then, of course, educator-directed play, which is also critical and is implemented when the goal is to support that academic skills. So that's what we need. If they've never heard it before, and I think of Anita Archer's, we really need that explicit instruction in order to get to discovery for these academic skills. So thinking of literacy and mathematics for that, but that we can construct those really purposeful play-based contexts and direct the student learning and provide that explicit instruction by modeling and scaffolding. And remember, though, it's important to consider all three of these as they contribute to literacy learning. Long blocks of play. So thinking about how those long blocks of play enable children to really go deep into their play and gives them authentic opportunities to develop their oral language. And I loved this idea. I love this idea. And I asked Nikki and she said I could share it, but she actually carries she says fanny pack, and she said her children would be disappointed. But I also thought we have a lot of people that wear the aprons. Like there's so many different ways you could carry a little backpack, but she consistently has these tools with her. So looking at different types of ways to have those sound boxes, the Alconin boxes, the Tuvalu, just for that hearing themselves, the stretchy band, mirrors. I know for me, the mirrors, whether you're talking about the social emotional learning or the articulation, those mirrors are so valuable. But I just love this idea that it was handy and portable. And of course, the Post-it notes, because you never know when a student might just want to jot down their thoughts or use pictures and words to label something, or especially outdoors, and even within the classroom. I loved this, and she said, "Yes, you can share." When I was able to visit various classrooms, I have only pictures from that are newer. Mine are a little dated. They're great, but I just liked this. So the educator had read this story, and it's from the Renardo y ses amis series. And just having those play invitations that are available that stem from the read alouds. And I remember specifically Gros Grognon. I don't know if you've read that story, but the students used little popsicle sticks and retold the story at the puppet theater. And they did it en français. And I'll never forget, I knew it hit when a little girl came from gym and she's like, Je suis fâchée. And I'm like, oh, it's working. It's working. So just really thinking about what invitations can you put out, what provocations to support vocabulary and language and reenact and build on their learning. Uh, so I was thinking about, I had a great opportunity to work closely with speech language pathologists, and I'm thinking of Melinda Hinch and her owl. So she's like, you have to observe first and then wait and then listen, and then you go into the conversation. And so thinking about as an educator, if students are really engaged in play, you don't want to just jump in. You need to see what's happening. And then I was thinking about how it really goes well with Strive for Five, how we can use that structure from the Strive for Five book to elicit vocabulary, make connections, and really practice new learning. And of course, when it comes to written expression, uh, thinking of those December 3-year-olds and the January students that are going to be 6 at January of SK, and celebrating all the forms of written expression, celebrating the scribble, but also supporting correct letter formation. I think that you can do both. I think I actually got quite emotional. I was in a K1 class. They were doing sonograph. I couldn't believe how close within the lines like the students stayed. And it wasn't like the educator was like, you need to. They were doing, and I was like, wow. Just thinking about how can you use opportunities for interactive writing. And this is actually a class created poster that's Je suis capable, and it's like celebrating the students' strengths within their class and just using that phonetic orthography. So I'm just thinking, you've got a vet center or a kitchen set up, a Tim Hortons. Like, how can students label the class and bring that center to life with their writing? Offering literacy materials outdoors. And again, thank you, Nikki, for her idea of the Wonder Wagon. I love that. But I know myself, and of course, I know when I was doing my kindergarten specialist, one of the things I did was redesign a playground outside, an outdoor learning space, sorry, I should say, because some schools it is a little limited. But what can you bring outdoors that really supports that literacy learning, and knowing that adult interaction is really important, especially in FI, because that's where they're hearing the French, but for meaningful learning, inquiry, and collaboration. It's not necessarily an opportunity for a break. There's a difference. And I know I have administrators ask me, like, what's the difference between recess and outdoor learning? And so knowing like outdoor learning is really that applying of those skills, and there's adult interaction and involvement. And again, that community, the eating together as a community. And I know sometimes, we have open snack, but sometimes there are schedule constraints or other constraints, but just that opportunity to build those relationships and invite connection, engaging in meaningful dialogue. And I think also the other thing, and I think about myself when I was learning French, and I still recall like reading Beurre d'Arachide and Dentifrice, using that environmental print as an opportunity to build vocabulary for the students. Small group instruction, and it's interesting because we just presented to administrators about this just yesterday, and so having those opportunities for small group instruction in kindergarten and making sure that they're assessment driven, so focused on word recognition and language comprehension based on student needs and data, short with a clear goal, opportunity for practice. So thinking of the I do, we do, you do approach, even within that small group. And of course, progress monitoring. I know that we're there now, Una, as a school, like we're there, we're ready. And educators are seeing the value of that progress monitoring as such a quick snapshot to see, is this working? And if not, what do I need to change? Is it the instruction, the grouping, the materials, the time? And sometimes in kindergarten, you need shorter bits of time a little further apart. Or I know I just had a conversation with someone and I'm like, maybe they need to move, like maybe they need to jump it as opposed to sit. Like that could be what they need to do. So just thinking about those things and just that progress monitoring is so powerful. And I do like this where showing if you're in a room with 2 educators, what does that look like, sound like? So where you'll see here that one of the educators is engaged in small group instruction and relationship building, while the other one is in that interactive play with students and engaging in pedagogical documentation, and then they flip and then where there's one educator, they're splitting their time. So I really liked this visual that Nikki shared, and again, it definitely applies in the FI context. And I was thinking about the importance of collaboration, and I find this especially important because sometimes families don't know what to do if their child's in French immersion. They don't see their role. And I know that we tell parents it's okay if you don't speak French, like that is ours. But please, please, please engage with your child, interact with your child in your first language at home. Please, that's really critical. But thinking about with the student at the center, how can we gather that data to determine what we need to do for the student? How can we use our observations to to get to know each student better, to know our learner and know their strengths, their interests, and what they need? And then thinking about our resources and our allies. So thinking about the student themselves, the parents, our colleagues, administrators, experts, community partners, and of course, professional learning organizations, and collaborating really to plan and develop our pedagogy so that we can support students to the maximum of our ability. Again, I go back to these examples because I think about knowing that the key message is that literacy supports play throughout the day and play supports the literacy. So that reciprocal relationship between those two things. And it's also a really great opportunity for us to model French language and provide authentic opportunities for students to interact and adults, sorry, to interact and develop proficiency as they grow. So we're going to move into the questions now, and I just kind of want you to consider your flow of the day, your immersion context, and how can you honor that structured literacy and play in a rich oral language environment to support early acquisition of French, and thinking about how the play and structured literacy really enrich and support one another.